What does the astrology for this decade point to? Join me, Dallisa Hocking, clarity and activation coach, for a compelling chat with researcher and astrologer Dan Waits. Oh my gosh. So everybody watching this is in for a real treat. I have Dan Waits with me, and he has one of my most favorite YouTube channels I have ever followed. World Astrology Report is the name of the YouTube channel. Every time, Dan, I see the notification go off on YouTube that you've made a video, I'm like a kid in a candy store, and I can't wait to see what topic you've covered. And I have you for my viewers and my channel, and we are going to dive into the astrology of the 2020s. So before I just keep talking about how amazing you are, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Yeah, hi everyone. That's a very, very kind introduction. I'm not sure if I'm quite worthy of it, but it's great to be here. And yeah, thanks very much for having me on your show.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So ironically, I am outside of Seattle, Washington. It is dark. I have like this ghostly background here working off of one light in my in my living room, and you are clear across the globe. Tell everybody where you're at if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm in Phuket, Thailand right now. So we're at the other side of the day, and I'm drinking coffee. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. So I'm going to read a little bit about Dan to give everybody watching just an idea of what kind of work that you do. So Dan Waits is a consulting astrologer, researcher, and content creator focused on mundane and natal astrology. He says, "My goal is to use astrological wisdom and historical research," and he does, "to understand the times we're living in and living through, and help more people cross the threshold into a magical cosmos." His writing on mundane astrology can be found at worldastrologyreport.substack.com. And of course, the YouTube channel I mentioned, World Astrology Report. I'll put all the links in the video description so you won't miss a beat. I think we should start by explaining, since everyone watching this may be at a different level of understanding astrology, what is mundane astrology? What is natal astrology? Can you give us a brief description of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, natal astrology is probably the astrology that most viewers will be familiar with, which is really looking at people's like individuals' natal charts. So a natal chart is really just a chart or a diagram showing the position of the planets and various other things at the moment of somebody's birth. And so, when you go and see an astrologer for a consultation, you're essentially that's natal astrology. You're asking the astrologer to read your natal chart, perhaps use various techniques to see who you are, where you're going, what's coming, what kind of things you need to prepare yourself for, all that kind of thing. So that's natal astrology. Mundane astrology, it's a bit of a weird word, mundane astrology. Most people know that word as meaning kind of boring. I don't think it's boring, but it basically means world astrology. And so I think that's actually a better name for it, really, just to call it world astrology. It's using similar techniques, some different ones, but generally similar techniques, but in a different way, in order to predict and analyze events in the world. So, whether it's politics or geopolitics or things that happen in the news, a mundane astrologer is going to be looking at that kind of thing, looking back at history, seeing what happened in the past when we saw certain alignments or certain things in the sky, and then trying to understand what's going on now, why things are as they are right now, and perhaps trying to predict where things might go in the future.
I love that explanation. Thank you for going through that. And I will attest, in watching your videos, I can tell you do a lot of research on history. and how history may be repeating itself. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. I know we want to focus this discussion on the astrology of the 2020s. So I've had a bit of a sneak peek because I've been following your channel, but because there's going to be so many new people watching this video that have never been introduced to you before, what do you think, if you had to just give us a sentence or a few words of what you think this decade is going to be like for the world, how would you sum it up, or can you even sum it up?
It's very difficult to sum it up concisely in a short, snappy phrase, because I think there are changes happening this decade at various different levels. But I think some of the most prominent and I think notable levels are, firstly, we can see that there's some sort of rearrangement that seems to be happening in terms of geopolitics, in terms of how the world is arranged, like the sort of world order. It's being contested, and I think we can see that a little bit in the news, in the various conflicts, quite terrible wars that are taking place in different parts of the world right now. But there's maybe a bigger picture, I think, which is that the order that we've had perhaps since the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union dissolved and the world order really changed at that time, and we entered a period of time when we had a sole superpower, the United States, and that was kind of that order was rather stable for a couple of decades, but it's becoming kind of unstable now. I think we can all see that. So I think a big part of what's coming over this decade is the contesting of that order, and perhaps coming towards a new sort of settlement or new world arrangement, because we have to live together on this planet, and it's getting smaller and smaller. That's another theme that I think is really playing into what's going on. The world has become almost far smaller than it's ever been before, because we can now easily communicate with anyone else in the world instantly. The internet is kind of, in a sense, is sort of breaking down the boundaries between people. We're in a very in a certain sense, we're in quite a Piscean moment. Pisces, the sign of Pisces is, it's this oceanic sign in which we're all kind of linked together as just sort of drops in the ocean. Over the last, say, decade or so, when social media really exploded, smartphones and so on, the boundaries between us broke down in quite profound ways, and that's been, that you can argue there's some good things about that and some not some good things about that. There's certainly teething problems. It's hard for us to get used to this, when we're all sort of almost our consciousness are kind of put together in this sort of single sort of electronic space, and so that process is also playing into this. It's actually going to deepen, I think, because the other part of what we're going to see this decade, I think, is technological revolution. We can kind of see it happening already. There's questions about AI. Is it overhyped? Is it not? But I personally think it's undoubtedly going to have some quite profound effects on things. And one of the things that's caught my eye is the translation technology that's coming out that's powered by AI, because what that can really do is it can allow anyone on Earth to speak to anyone else on Earth in their own language, and the AI is even able to change the way your mouth moves. So you could have a conversation with somebody in, say, rural China who doesn't speak English, and I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm guessing if perhaps you do speak Mandarin Chinese, I don't know, but this technology would allow you to have a conversation with that person as if you were, that person was speaking English and you were speaking fluent Chinese, and even your mouth would be moving, as it should, and your accent would also be conveyed. So this is really powerful stuff, in that we're entering this sort of space in which we're all somehow connected and able to communicate with each other. And the world is very small now. And so these are some of the sort of big themes, I think, that are coming in. I could go on, but just, those are some of the first things that come to mind.
No, that's great. But when I hear you talk about the connectivity and the Pisces and maybe the disillusion of boundaries, right? I also think about, and of course, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I live in the United States, and there's a lot of talk here about a great American divorce or states leaving the union and what that might look like. And then we hear the news of countries outside of the US that are raging these wars. So I hear the connective piece, but I also hear, just in what I pick up psychically and studying different astrologers and what they're seeing, it's almost like there's two sides of the coin where we'll have a lot of connection with each other. And I do agree with you about AI. And then I also think there's division. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The way that reality unfolds is never simple. There are always contradictions in individuals and in things that are playing out in the world. So I was actually about to say. So I think one of the big themes of these times is the question of centralization versus decentralization. And so there are forces that are pushing for more and more centralization. And at the same time, there are opposing forces that are pushing for decentralization. And so there's some way in which I think we're looking at kinds of decentralization as well playing out over the next couple of decades. And one of the reasons I say that is that we have Pluto now in the sign of Aquarius. Now, if we look back to the past, when Pluto's been in Aquarius, what we've seen is kind of rebellions against the center, or whatever the center is. And this can play out kind of at all sorts of different levels, from like the greatest level, from at the level of the globe, to within countries and within communities, and sort of all the way down, because we're looking at kind of fractal stuff here. Now, so we are seeing challenges to the center at the same time. And I think there's a reason for that is partly because the world is smaller. We are sort of, there is this sort of Piscean breaking down of the boundaries, and that makes people or entities or states or whatever actually want to assert their individuality, sort of almost in a sort of contradictory fashion, because it's sort of I think it's part of the process of this, of kind of, we come together, we learn what each other thinks about things, and we almost can't escape that. And so that we are also seeing, I think, people, states, and so on. There's some assertion of sovereignty that's coming as well. And so, yeah, it's contradictory. I think the very biggest picture is that we're all in this sort of world together, and we kind of have to learn to live with each other. But what we're going to see with Pluto and Aquarius is we're going to see more decentralization, as exactly as you say. If we look back at past transits of Pluto and Aquarius, the last time that happened, we saw the French Revolution, for example. So it was a rebellion against the center, which was the French king of that time. And we also saw the establishment of the institutions of the United States. It was 1789, Pluto's in Aquarius. We see the establishment of the US government, and this is a new center that's kind of established away from the old center, which is, say, Britain, the King George. And we have this kind of new center being established kind of across the ocean. And you see this pattern over and over again. So if you go back to the 16th century, so Pluto's cycle is 250 years. If you go back another 250 years to the 16th century, we have, for example, Henry VIII founding or making himself the head of the Church of England and separating himself from the authority of the Pope in Rome. it's a similar, you can see archetypally the pattern is very similar. It's this new center being established away from what was previously central. So, this is a kind of, as an astrologer, you kind of look for these sort of archetypal patterns, and you break them down to something very simple, which is, new center, the establishment of new centers or rebellion against the center. So that's also something that we're seeing. You're absolutely right about that, I think.
How long does it go on for, Dan?
Not long. I mean, it's really just 20 years, it's just a blink in the cosmic eye.
That is true. But everybody listening to this, you hear, your references historically, what's happened before, and you can probably see behind me, I have on top of my refrigerator, I'm stocking up food and water and cat food. It's like, I'm just waiting because I feel the energy bubbling up, and it feels to me like it is going to pop. And I think it's going to pop in a few different ways. I don't think there's going to be just one thing that happens and then we wait till it's over and everything's fine. It feels like there's going to be like these ripples through the world that are going to change a lot of the ways that we live, that we work, how we connect. It feels like once we're out of these next 20 years that I don't even think we really recognize ourselves or our lives how they are today. That's just what I pick up psychically. Do you get the same sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, it's not just going to be one thing. It's profound change coming at multiple levels, right, from the life of the individual all the way up to the very biggest picture. You can see this also with the United States as well. There's obviously a lot of tension internally in the United States at the moment, and there's let's say there's a process of contesting kind of how the United States should work, and the question of like federal authority and state authority has come up. I think we've seen it quite a bit in the news over the last year or two. For example, what's been going on in Texas is a kind of prominent example. And again, you kind of see that same theme kind of coming up there a little bit. There's a center and there's sort of some contestation of it. But yeah, absolutely. I think we're not going to recognize the world. And yeah, it's going to, in a sense, it's a very, very interesting time to be alive, and sort of a very interesting process to be alive to witness. So from the perspective of kind of seeing great change happening with your own eyes, we're almost fortunate in that respect. Although obviously big changes don't also come without some difficulty as well. So there's also that to bear in mind.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've been shown from Spirit is the importance of your micro communities, knowing the people that live next door to you, knowing what shops, you can get to within walking distance, and really building the community of where you're at without relying on any kind of transportation. So if I take that psychic message, it feels like they're trying to, Spirit, universe, the path that we may be on in humanity is bringing that connection, although there will be ways to do it globally, but also how do you connect with the people that are in your close proximity, and the importance that those people and relationships will play in this next chapter.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you've also picked that up in your own way, because from an astrological perspective, there's lots of layers in astrology. It gets really complicated, and it takes a lot of explanation. But there's a sense that the air element. There are 4 classical elements, right? We have fire, earth, air, and water. And we're in a period now where we've just kind of moved from a time of great kind of earthy emphasis. You can see that in the kind of, what's happened over the last couple of centuries. So the Industrial Revolution, I think the sort of takeover of the planet by, say, capitalism, we've become very, very materially oriented in this Earth period. But we've moved now into a much more airy period. So the archetype of air is kind of coloring coloring the times in a really strong way. Now, if you think about the air, what do creatures of the air do? Well, if you think about birds and insects and stuff, they swarm or they flock. They have their, a bird has its flock. And so I think the importance of finding your flock, and then building and strengthening it, kind of understanding it, etc. That's really characteristic of these times, and it really reflects what you say. Again, Pluto in Aquarius is kind of also has to do with the empowerment of groups or the collective. So I think what we're seeing perhaps is we're going to see something of a breakdown of bigger institutions and the sort of structures that we've been used to relying on, and then a need to find our flocks, find the people that we can rely on, and as you say, people in your community, and finding security in that way.
Interesting indeed, Dan. We had in the US, and I'm not familiar with it happening in other parts of the world, but it could be, these objects or balloons in our sky, and it will sometimes come on the news and they'll say, oh, there's a fighter jet looking into it, whatever it is, right? So I've had people in my community through Spirit and Spark ask about, are we being invaded? Are there UFOs or UAPs? Are we being visited by aliens? When you mention Pluto and Aquarius, I have to ask, because Aquarius, to me, that energy feels like it could align with beings from another place. So is there anything astrologically that points to either an invasion or being visited by galactic beings?
So in a word, yes, I think there is. Aquarius is traditionally the sign of the outsider or the stranger. So you can certainly see, quote unquote alien beings kind of as sort of being represented by that archetype. And one thing that we've seen in these previous Pluto and Aquarius transits, is that not only do you see challenges against the center, but you also see the revelation of new centers that, like, peoples discover each other, for example, is one of the things that happens. So if you go back to the 13th century, we had a Pluto in Aquarius transit then. This was when Marco Polo was in China, and then he came back to Europe and said, there's this incredible civilization at the other side of the world that we didn't know about. And then if you look at say the one that in the 16th century, we had encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples in the Americas. If you look at the previous one, the 18th century, this was when the British were landing in Australia and coming face to face with the indigenous people there. And so there's this sense of kind of encountering the other, or other peoples that you weren't aware of. Now, what does that mean today? What does that mean in this world? We kind of like to think that we know exactly who all the intelligent beings on this planet are, but I would say, well, do we actually? Are we so sure about that? So, yeah, there's other stuff that's happening as well. There are other cycles that I've studied that do, to me, suggest that this theme. I don't know if I want to say alien invasion. I mean, I'm not going to say that's impossible, but I think the perhaps becoming aware that this phenomenon is in some sense real, I think is something that we can potentially expect over the coming years. Now, what the other question? I mean, that brings up the question: well, what is the phenomenon? Is it alien beings? As some people say. I'm not convinced by that. They might be. I think we have to keep open-minded, in my opinion, about what this thing could be. I certainly believe it's real, in the sense that there are so many documented cases of people having these strange experiences, seeing lights in the sky, encountering beings, and so on. There's some. I think there's certainly something going on, and that there's an intelligence behind what's going on. Now, what is it? What is that phenomenon? I don't think we know, but I think we're going to get more revelations about it. Just as a kind of astrological tidbit about this, Pluto, as I have said, is in Aquarius now, but it moved into Aquarius for the first time between March and June of 2023. So because of the way that so the Earth is also revolving around the sun, which means that sometimes the planets move in what we call retrograde. Everybody's heard of Mercury retrograde. That's basically because the Earth is also moving. So Mercury appears to kind of move backwards. And that's what happens to the planets sometimes. So Pluto in particular, because it's so far out, it moves, when it's moving around the zodiac, it will make a few steps forward and then a couple of steps back. Few steps forward, a couple of steps back. So it already moved into Aquarius for about 11 weeks last year, and then stepped back into Capricorn, the sign before. Now it's back in Aquarius. But that little period there was a kind of preview, I think, of Pluto in Aquarius. We got some omens, if you want to think of it like that, sort of omens of what's coming over this 20-year period. And one of the omens, I think, was revelations about this subject, because this was when this guy David Grush suddenly emerged. If anyone was following the news, he testified in Congress that the United States supposedly has programs to like deconstruct, alien spacecraft and so on. Now, whether or not that's true is a different question. There's a lot of it's a very murky topic, shall we say. There's a lot of confusion, perhaps some sort of deliberate deception involved in it, and so on. I think it's risky to believe anything too fervently in this area. Like, we can sort of remain open, but with a sort of certain skepticism. But the fact that he emerged, and this subject was all over the news at that time, and as you mentioned, also the balloons as well. Those strange balloons and these unidentified objects that were seen, but then we didn't really hear much more about them. There wasn't much of a explanation as to what had really happened there. I think you might have noticed, and that's a bit odd. So yeah, I think you're right. In just to sum up, yes.
Yes. So if we think about perhaps more disclosure or more information about what these objects are, where they're coming from. It reminds me of something you said a few minutes back about decentralization, and institutions that maybe we've relied on could be going through their own dissolution, right? So it brings up religion. That's where my mind went. Is if we find out that we have an origin story that maybe doesn't match what we've been told, then does that question religion and religious institutions? So I don't know if there's anything about religion in the astrology, or what may be coming about our beliefs or our philosophies. But that was the correlation that came up just now for me as you were talking about learning more about these beings or crafts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've covered this subject a bit on my channel. So if because it gets rather complicated, and the sort of mechanics of it and so on, and why I'm saying the things I'm saying. So if I would suggest people do check that out if they want to look into this. But what I am seeing is that this phenomenon is somehow correlated to our deepest beliefs about ourselves and about the world, essentially. And so you can use the word religion. I think what we're actually seeing in the world in general at the moment is the emergence of some kind of new religion or new faith, and it has to do with this phenomenon. You could, if you it's hard for us to see what's happening because we're so deep in this. You know, we're living through history, and it's difficult for us to take a sort of bigger perspective. But astrology does kind of allow us to cheat a bit and do that. It kind of allows us to take sort of step back and take a sort of view from the sky a bit on what's happening in history. And I think that we are seeing some sort of new faith emerging. It hasn't kind of been codified or sort of made too formal yet. But I think some of the things that this perhaps new belief system involves are some of the things that we'd associate with kind of the New Age movement and sort of beliefs about. You see, there's a lot of people today who would describe themselves as, say, spiritual but not religious. You hear that all the time: spiritual but not religious. Or people who believe in past lives, reincarnation. There's a lot of ideas that are sort of mixed from, I think, ideas from the West and from the East, from the religions of the East, from Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on, that are all kind of coming together. So you get people that believe in, as I say, these sort of past lives, that there are kind of energetic currents in the world which science hasn't really accounted for, that there's a realm of spirit, which, you know, but they approach it from a different angle to how people approached it, say, through the formal structures of, say, Christianity, Islam, and so on. So I think what that is, and so, by the way, one of the things is often an openness to the existence of extraterrestrials or beings, other sort of beings, and so on. I think that's also in the mix. And I suspect that what we're seeing is actually the formation of some new belief structure, essentially if you want, a new religion. It's kind of emergent, and we're just sort of watching it happen, but it's not been formalized. And I think we're going to see. I'm not sure if it will quite achieve that sort of formal status so soon. We're talking about a process that will take decades and centuries, I think. But yeah, I think you're really on the money to kind of gravitate to that subject of religion. It's really integrated with what we're seeing.
Fascinating. I have so many questions, Dan, and so little time. Okay, so we've talked about Pluto and Aquarius. You know, we're in 2024 is when we're recording this. And so we have, what, another 6 years of this decade. Are there any other big astrological transits that you have your eye on?
Yes. Yes, there
Which
are.
ones?
Yeah. So there really are. Yeah. So what's interesting about what's going on now is that we're actually seeing, or we're going to see several big transitions of slow-moving planets into new signs in the next couple of years. So Pluto's in the process of transitioning into Aquarius, but we're also about to see both Neptune and Uranus and Saturn as well. Saturn in this context is almost a fast-moving planet, but yeah, so Uranus and Neptune are also about to change signs. So from the middle of 2025, Uranus and Neptune will move into new signs. So Neptune is going to move from Pisces, where it is now, into Aries. It's a transitional process, so it's going to take, again, as I said, the planets kind of move backwards and forwards a little bit. So this is a process that's going to take place between 2025 and 2026. So Neptune will move in and out of Aries, and so that's a huge transition as well. And then Uranus is currently in Taurus, and from the middle of 2025 and into 2026, it will transition into Gemini. And now, so those that, you know, any outer planet sign change is a pretty big deal. generally, and we're getting all three of the outer planets changing signs in a very short period of time. So that's a pretty big deal. What might this mean?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Dan, because I just wrote down Neptune into Aries.
Yeah.
Now, when I hear Neptune into Aries, those two things don't add up to me. Those energies feel very, very different to me. So, what does that mean, Neptune into Aries? Like, what have we seen historically, or what do you think could, be brought about with that energy?
Yeah. So Neptune has to do with the themes of kind of faith, imagination, illusion, delusion, and all those kind of things. Even things like drugs and sort of mental health issues and so on. These all come under sort of Neptune's purview. Neptune is kind of about all those things that sort of perhaps exist alongside the material world, but sort of beyond it somehow, into the sort of the ineffable realms. And Neptune has been very strong in the sign that's in Pisces. Neptune and Pisces have a lot of what's the word? It's escaping me now, but
the same song. They dance to the same song,
yeah.
I feel like.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of similarity between them. A lot of modern astrologers hold Neptune as the ruler of Pisces. I tend to use traditional rulerships myself, but there's clearly a very strong affinity between Neptune and Pisces. They're exactly as you say. They're dancing to the same song, and so this has been the last, say, almost 15 years. I think it was 2011 when Neptune moved into Pisces. And what have we seen since then? Well, this was really when everybody sort of got a smartphone and got addicted to social media. There's this kind of huge wave of we all plunged into these kind of social media realms, and we were all kind of mixed up together in this sort of Piscean electronic ocean, so to speak. I mean, we've also, but the other thing about social media is, of course, there's a huge element of kind of fakeness to it. It's not really real. We're kind of often what we're portraying on social media is an illusion. No, this is Neptunian essentially. We've also seen a huge rise in mental health issues, and there's been a lot of problems with drugs as well. Some of the things that have accompanied that. Now, it's going to be a big shift to move into Aries, because Neptune and Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. It's kind of it's the end of the story of the zodiac. You can think of the zodiac as a story of 12 signs, and it's almost like the story of life. Pisces is the return to source, almost. Aries, on the other hand, is the start of the story. It's a sign that's ruled by Mars. So Aries has this much more martial energy to it. Aries is about heading out into the world, doing things first, pioneering, adventuring, experiencing the self. Aries is a very self-oriented sign, in a sense, because Aries, there's a certain directness and honesty to Aries. Aries just wants to kind of go out there. This is me, and I want to figure out who I am by sort of taking action and doing things and testing my potential and all that kind of thing. But of course, it's ruled by Mars as well, so it can have to do with conflict as well. I think things are going to start to feel there's going to be a certain seriousness, I think, that comes in 2025 and 2026, because Saturn is also accompanying Neptune into Aries as well. Saturn is a planet that has to do with duty, responsibility, authority, and so on. Themes of this nature, and so they're both moving into Aries at the same time. So I think there's going to be a certain sense of things getting a bit more serious, and with a certain seriousness of purpose. The last time that Neptune moved into Aries was 1861. In fact, I have the exact date that did that. It was the 13th of April, 1861. Now, I believe it was the 12th of April, 1861, when the United States Civil War started. So I don't want to, we don't necessarily have to expect that the same thing is coming again, but that's just, that's an example of what can happen with these sign changes. It was like almost to the day. And that, Aries is a sign that we would associate with war. Now, I don't want to, again, I don't want people to necessarily take that's what's coming, but we also have to be aware of the possibilities. There's going to be a certain sense of, I think, things getting a bit serious. It could be that that's due to some sort of conflict that's going on. And so I think things are going to feel very different suddenly. I also think the area that we've seen with social media is going to change. I think it's going to change quite quickly. I think we can already feel it a little bit in that I think there's a lot of, we've really started to see the downsides of social media. For example, in kind of how it affects young people, or the depression that's afflicting young women, and not just women, but everybody really. But it hits young people quite hard. This competition to look good on social media and so on. I think there are other critiques as well of it. We've seen there's a lot of any kind of information can flow around, and that's good and bad, right? Because it does allow the truth to out at times. It sort of means that the truth can evade gatekeepers, but it also means a load of nonsense as well can easily flow around as well. And so I think things are going to change quite a bit. I think we're maybe going to more and more move to other kinds of platforms that are a bit more like group-based, kind of you and your group of like-minded people, maybe something like that. That's something I could see coming over the next few years.
That makes sense, especially with the micro communities that we were talking about a little bit back. The idea of war that comes to mind when you're speaking is, yes, the enhancements of AI technology and cyber warfare. So I do think there is this energy amping up of war, but I agree. I think we have to keep an open mind as to how that plays out and who's involved in it, because we've been having a lot of cyber attacks here in the United States. And each time I see a headline come over on the news about the latest cyber attack, the words I hear through clairaudience is, this is just their warm up. So I feel like there's more coming with cyber warfare, and that's not to create fear in people. It's more just to have a conversation about how the astrology can be pointing to different things that could happen. And instead of feeling fearful, maybe buying extra food and water makes you feel like you're doing something proactive, regardless of what happens in the world. So, okay, yeah, Neptune into Aries, and then you mentioned Uranus into Gemini. So that sounds like fun, Dan. Do you want to tell us about that one?
Does sound like fun, doesn't it? I think it's so Uranus is the planet that we associate with revolution, sudden insights, sudden reversals, just flipping the table, changing things up, doing things completely differently. These are sort of, and freedom as well. These are very Uranian keywords. Now, Gemini, the twins, the sign of eternal, unquenchable curiosity about the world. The Gemini that wants to live 100 lives, wants to know everything there is to know, and tell everybody about it. This is sort of archetypal Gemini. So Uranus into Gemini is also actually the other thing to bear in mind. Gemini ruled by Mercury. Mercury, the messenger, the communicator, the negotiator, the trader, and so on. So Uranus going into that sign. I mean, as if we haven't already seen enough of it, this also looks like revolutions in information technology, in communications technology. It's it's almost like where we're at now. It's kind of like it's tempting to just think, really, do we need more? But that seems to be what it suggests. So it's very much looks like I think very new things coming into the airy Gemini realm. New technologies, fast. It looks quite fast moving, and I think that's how things will feel. Things are going to be changing quite quickly. And yeah, so it's probably going to I think intensify this sort of AI revolution that we're seeing as well. It's obviously already begun, and Pluto in Aquarius seems to certainly be signifying that, because one of the things that happened last year, just as Pluto was entering Aquarius in March, is that's when we had this huge boom in news about AI, new tools, all the chat stuff about the chatbots and being out of control and so on. That's very Plutonian. Pluto can have to do with fears and with intent, like deep, real intensifications of feeling around things. So I think Uranus also moving into an air sign, into Gemini, it will be kind of harmonizing with Pluto and Aquarius. Those two planets are kind of then sort of in what we call a trine by sign. There's a lot of flow, and so there's a lot of change happening in the airy realm, in the realm of communication, ideas, thinking. And we can already start to see sort of strange things coming into the world. We've seen Apple release this Apple Vision Pro thing. It's quite expensive device, which allows essentially, is essentially a kind of extended reality device. So you can suddenly see computer generated objects and images all around you. It's really changing the sort of nature of reality for you when you're wearing something like that. We've also seen this Neuralink device that Elon Musk is behind, and that would also very much fit into the air realm. And so I think what we'll see is these kind of really crazy technologies coming into the world. Some people are going to embrace them. Some people aren't going to embrace them. Some people are going to say, no, that's too much, or that's not who we are as humans, and we don't need that. And so we're going to see an interesting dynamic, I think, with some people plunging kind of headfirst into this technology. And I think, like a lot of people, personally, I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I have really mixed feelings about technology, because I quite enjoy it, and that's how I run my business and make that's a big part of my life. But at the same time, I'm quite skeptical about our growing dependence on it, as to how healthy is this. What we'll also probably see is devices that try to simulate spiritual experience. So electronic devices that claim to, for example, there's already something called, I think, lucid dreamer, that will supposedly kind of stimulate you to have lucid dreams. This is just an example of the kind of thing we can expect, but you can learn to do lucid dreaming without technology. You don't need it. So this is also there's an element of kind of almost a spiritual battle here, in that this technology is probably going to be introduced that sort of simulate or replace kind of spiritual experience, which you can work on natural abilities. So okay, people have different natural abilities. I know yours are obviously very developed, but anybody can develop their I think abilities to some extent, and the technology is going to come along and that will say, no, you don't need to do that. Just put our device on your head, and we'll do it for you. We have an app for that. So that's some of what I'm expecting.
So I think we have a thief in my apartment. So I've got this cat named Fraser, and I mentioned that food I was storing earlier. Yeah, he's up there taking a look at it. So if I don't have any survival food, I'm going to need you to come to the rescue, Dan, okay? A question that I do have is, do you see on the good news, the upside of the astrology, do you sense that there will be medical advancements and cures for diseases because of the increase of AI?
I think so. I would expect that. Yes, I think. Yeah, I don't want to paint too much of a doom and gloom picture. There's going to be some great advances. I think there's, and as you say, medical advances will be part of that. I mean, the great, I think, potential of AI is that it can plow through and understand huge data sets, and hidden in data are answers that that would be helpful to us. But we as humans, we're not really capable of processing those kind of huge amounts of information. AI can potentially do that and bring out insights which are beneficial. So there certainly is that. It's kind of like there's a sense that AI is like a torch that we can shine into the sort of the murky sort of realm of data and pull out insights, and that's both a really good thing, and also something to be somewhat wary of as well, in that torch can be shined at at individuals. So it's something that potentially could be abused by more totalitarian governments or authoritarian governments as well. So it's going to be a time of great opportunity and risk as well. I think that's always the case when things are changing fast, and that's why I think it's important to bear in mind the positive potentials and the less positive ones at the same time. There's you sometimes get a bit of an argument in the astrological or spiritual community about, should you talk about less desirable outcomes, bad things, should you predict difficult things, and so on. And I don't think you should predict them in the sense that you say this will happen and it's going to be really bad. But I think it's important that we highlight the more challenging possibilities so that we can avoid them, or so that we can see them, we can recognize them when they sort of present themselves. But yeah, I think there could be great advances. The potential advances with like quantum computing as well. It's a sort of entirely new way of doing computing, which could be a hell of a lot more powerful than what we have now. So you're right, it could unearth amazing medical insights, scientific insights, and fix some of the problems that we have. So that is something to be optimistic about, for sure.
So anyone watching this video and everything you just shared, I'm sure they have a lot on their mind now. Hopefully they took notes, and they can always rewatch the video, of course. But what would your advice be to somebody listening to this? There's going to be big waves. I think of life as a piece of orchestra music, and there's going to be high notes, there's going to be valleys, and at the end, it tells a beautiful story, right, through song. So for everybody listening, I said, wow, Dan's amazing. What should I do? What would you give them as just advice from you?
So aside, one of the pieces of advice I do give people, as we already mentioned, is to find your people, find that network of like-minded people that you can rely on, that you trust, that you love. That's important. Another thing is that I think it's important to make sure that you're honoring all the planets. What do I mean by that? So there are, say, let's ignore the very sort of newer discovered outer planets. There are 7 traditional planets. We have the sun and moon. We have Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And I think one of the things that astrology teaches us is that to be healthy, to be happy, to live a satisfying and meaningful life, it's important to honor all of those things, the things that the different planets are calling us to pay attention to. And so one example of what I really mean is that say we are, as we've discussed, kind of entering this time where information technology is becoming more and more important. It's sort of penetrating deeper and deeper into our essences and so on. And it's important to make sure to kind of honor the body, for example, which is something that, say, the moon teaches us, or Mars, which is about kind of taking action. And perhaps we could see that as kind of exercising, and or if so much as you can, physical movement, at least, to kind of just bear in mind that those 7 archetypes are there as kind of teachers and examples, and we need to honor all of them. We need to sort of make sure that we're living all of them. Another example might be Saturn. Saturn is the planet that's associated with boundaries, for example. Am I asserting my own boundaries? Saturn's also associated with responsibility and duty. Those are also things to honor. And I know that this is more or less difficult for different individuals. We all have different lives, and some people it's difficult for them to. Well, some of these things are more difficult than they are for others. But I think there's usually ways that we can all, in some way, kind of honor the planet. So that's something that I think is important. And I also think, just in general, taking care of yourself both mentally and spiritually, practicing good spiritual hygiene, for example. I wouldn't like prescribe certain practices to people. I think there are different ways of doing this, but for me, for example, it's regular meditation and prayer, and then looking after my body, exercising, and so on. Like, all of that stuff is important. And I think when things get rocky, it's quite tempting to just jettison that stuff. And that's almost like that can be the worst thing you can do sometimes, because then you actually make it more likely that you're going to succumb to stress or burnout or whatever it is. So those are some of the things that I tend to recommend.
Those are great suggestions. It reminds me of a Rumi quote that I put, I think, everywhere, is live life as if everything is rigged in your favor, and trying to find those silver linings. And when there are difficult days, because there will be difficult days ahead for every single one of us, that hopefully in those darkest of moments, we still can go within and find a moment of grace and know that whatever is unfolding for us, and that there are treasures in every dark moment.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I love Rumi. So many good quotes. So many good quotes. World Astrology Report is your YouTube channel. As I mentioned earlier, I'm putting the link to that in the notes of this video. It is a must subscribe to YouTube channel. Trust me, when you see that notification go off that Dan has posted a new video, you will be so excited to watch his latest video. You must put so much time and effort into every single video that you do. They're so well produced and thoughtful. And I learned so many new things with every video that you put out. And I'm grateful that you are in this world so that we can learn from you. So World Astrology Report, go subscribe. And this is my channel, subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. Let's show Dan how awesome he did today. Let's celebrate this video together and sharing and coming together in for the love of astrology. So Dan Waits, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time and your talent.
You're very, very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, so thanks so much for having me.
We'll do it again soon, I promise.
Cool, great. Let's do that.